Hi, I'm actor Ian Champion, and welcome to History of Horror Cinema, my personal podcast tour of the good, bad, and the ugly of horror movie history. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe. Hold That Ghost, 1941. Following their army comedy Buck Privates, Abbott and Costello's new momentum as movie comedy stars slumped somewhat in applying the same reverence to another forces branch within the Navy, a weaker comedy watered down unhelpfully by matinee idol singer Dick Powell and the Andrews Sisters. Bud and Lou would continually rail against Universal's incessant watering down of their high-energy funny business with lame love interest subplots and musical interludes. These got in the way of the Marx Brothers' early hijinks as well. They regained their momentum, though, with their opening flirtation with the spooky in Hold That Ghost, a haunted house comedy of gangsters and ghouls. Abbott and Costello play a couple of temporary workers, Chuck and Ferdy, assigned by an agency to a nightclub as relief waiters. Jim Mulholland's book points out that the entire sequence was conceived after the film was shot, an obvious excuse to shoehorn in a couple of those songs that the duo complained about. The Andrews Sisters are pleasant enough, crooning Sweet Serenade, but they are preceded by the top hat and tails of Ted Lewis, who fronts his orchestra with a highly irritating, swooping, speak-sung rendition of Me and My Shadow that begs for him to be engulfed by it, not to mention the questionable tactic of giving him a black sidekick. Immediately, the duo fall foul of the frosty maitre d', Misha Auer, who'd already parlayed his mad Russian persona into a hugely busy career, last seen in my recent podcast on the Monster Walks. Our first sight of the boys is on their knees in the kitchen playing cards with the other staff. Off-screen, their shared passion for gambling ultimately drained both men of a vast amount of their considerable earnings. Here they have nothing to lose, which doesn't stop Bud lecturing Lou overbearingly about the correct way to wait on tables. Lou fits comfortably into their established dynamic of being the over-literal dim-wit man-boy. The polished gags work pretty well. Ferdy confuses Chuck's bullet-point cues of how to convert a customer's price objection. "I ought to punch you on the nose. If you don't, someone else will." Ferdy also gauchely misreads a young lady's secret dinner with a sugar daddy as being his real daughter. American TV stations usually edited out these prologue scenes, which is really no one's loss. The real plot begins when Chuck and Ferdy are relegated to gas station attendants. Ferdy characteristically misunderstands Ethel as a person, not a fuel, reasoning that if a driver asked for it, I'd tell them it's her day off. Public enemy number one, gangster Moose Matson, William B. Davidson, pulls in for gas, and the boys are swiftly embroiled into driving him through a police chase that ends with the gut-shot Matson gifting them with his last will and testament. This leads to my favorite gag in the picture. As the solicitor reads the will, instead of being set out in the usual legalese, it is blended with a transcript of Matson's own Damon Runyon-esque gangster lingo, made funnier by the solicitor's deadpan formal delivery, wherein I can't tell my friends from stoolies, leeches, or chiselers. After it sinks in that Abbott and Costello have inherited Matson's rural hotel as the last people to have been in contact with him, they are assisted by a colleague of the executor, the shady Charlie Smith, played by Mark Lawrence, who lived to the ripe old age of 95, allowing his career to stretch from 1932 to playing the old motel owner in From Dusk Till Dawn and beyond. He makes veiled remarks about how it'll be a pleasure to take you boys for a ride. Three Stooges fans should keep a lookout for Shemp Howard as the sourpuss drugstore soda jerk. Smith sets them up in more ways than one with a long cab journey to the hotel that along for the ride picks up other passengers. The prissy health nut Dr. Jackson, the creature from the Black Lagoon's hero Richard Carlson, love interest Norma Lind, Universal's horror stalwart Evelyn Ankers, and the standout of the ensemble, Joan Davis as Camille Brewster. Davis is the highlight of the film, a terrific daffy comedienne with a sassy one-of-the-boys manner. Her life was tragically cut short at just 48 from a heart attack in 1961, followed 2 years later by a horrific fire that killed her mother, daughter, and her 2 grandsons. I'd never seen her work before, but she is a wonderful foil to Lou. Their pastiche of Fred and Ginger's effortless elegance dancing to the tune of the Blue Danube in the hotel is a genuinely funny set piece, continually scuppered by collisions and pratfalls. Her character is a radio horror actor much like Bob Hope in the previous year's The Cat and the Canary, and her genre knowledge comes in handy, not to mention a piercingly effective scream. Brewster's tomboyish charm also helps to offset the developing romance between Dr. Jackson and Lind, which, to be fair, is less intrusive than the usual pace-killing forced romances in film comedies. The hotel provides the familiar old-fashioned tropes of candles, cobwebs, oppressive shadows, and bedsheet spooks for the party to explore. Lou stumbles upon an intriguing feature where his coat hook trips devices that turn his room into a clandestine casino of Matsons. Smith is strangled by unidentified hands. His body falls dead into our bumbling hero's path, and yet when the police turn up, the corpse has vanished. The mystery and chills increase with another famous sequence where Ferdy and Camille discuss a map whilst one candle moves by itself across the desk, followed by the other levitating. His reaction each time raises a smile, a panicky speechlessness that can only stutter out as desperate muttly wheezes till he can finally call out Chuck's name. In the climax, Lou discovers that Moose's name was also a clue to the location of his cash stash, falling out of the stuffed head as he becomes jammed in its maw. "I'll never join your lodge." He then does a convincing enough imitation of a police siren to scare off arriving gangsters who were in league with the bent cops. Finally, the boys come full circle, if you've seen the uncut film, by owning their own nightclub with the inherited loot and turning the restaurant tables on the maitre d', who is now their harassed employee. This becomes a cue for the Andrews sisters to sing Aurora. All told, Hold That Ghost is a pretty good rehearsal for Abbott and Costello's later full-on engagement with horror comedy, raiding the vaults of Universal's Monster Hall of Fame, and put them back on track as they rose to become the most profitable movie comics in the world. The Time of Their Lives, 1946. For a short period during 1945, the surefire comedy team of Abbott and Costello suffered in battle, though it was very much internal friendly fire combat between them that temporarily broke up the act. The result of this was a two-film spell where the boys appeared as separate characters rather than a duo, firstly in the relative failure Little Giant, filmed at the end of 1945, and then more markedly in the romantic fantasy comedy The Time of Their Lives, with a supernatural ghostly element. Fans not knowing their earlier work could be forgiven for thinking that this film was their introduction to each other. The division between them is so pronounced. They only interact with one another at the start as rival lovers. Happily, their dispute caused no harm to what turned out to be one of their best comedies. The script by Walter de Leon, Val Burton and Bradford Ropes, augmented by their resident gagsmith John Grant, eschews all the usual burlesque routines by necessity, and drives along a more seriously pursued plot than usual, but is still funny. The circumstances arguably injected a freshness into audiences' expectations of the team. Lou is given a charming, temporary new female partner to bounce off, while Bud demonstrates his skills as a straight actor in what is almost a leading man role. The setting is Kings Point in America's New England during 1780, 5 years into the War of Independence. Tom Danbury, Jess Parker, is the wealthy owner of a family estate whose staff include Abbott as his butler, Cuthbert Greenway, a dark schemer who will stop at nothing to marry housemaid Nora O'Leary, Ann Gillis. His rival for her affections is a travelling master tinker, Horatio Pym, Costello in lovable child-man mode. Horatio proudly bears a letter of recommendation from General George Washington that he hopes will impress Danbury enough to release Nora from servitude to marry him. This letter will become a focal point of the movie's plot. At this news, Greenway leaves nothing to chance and removes his competition by locking Pym in a trunk. Danbury, meanwhile, is even more corrupt. A secret British loyalist, he holds clandestine meetings to betray his countrymen. Nora is caught eavesdropping by him, so Danbury hides Prim's letter he gave her and conceals it in a clock. Tom's own fiancée, Melody Allen, Marjorie Reynolds, is about to ride off to alert the rebel forces with the newly escaped Horatio when arriving British soldiers shoot them in error. The poor dead pair are dumped down a well, leaving the officer to curse their presumed treacherous souls to an eternity bound to the property till crack of doom, unless proof of their innocence can be found. And so they must stay as spectral prisoners until 1946. A passage of time charmingly rendered by lovers' initials carved into love hearts on the estate trees across the decades. Director Charles Barton, in the first of 8 films he directed for Bud and Lou, ensures this first act of the story moves at a decent pace, which is just as well since it has to set up quite a congested storyline through till the modern day. The lace and periwigged costumes for the cast are handsomely produced by Rosemary Odell, and Milton Rosen's fanciful music score adds a welcome lightness. In terms of the boy's established characters, Costello benefits greatly from the luscious warmth of his partner Reynolds, at times softening his usually frenetic style so as not to overshadow her. They make an appealing double act, teasing each other like an elder sister and younger brother. Melody schools Horatio in the finer points of disappearing and teleportation, for example, allowing him the space to still be the wheezing, lily-livered innocent exclaiming, "Odds bodkins!" and other archaic phrases of wonderment. Abbott channels the alpha male persona he would normally use to dominate Costello into making Greenway an unsympathetic ancestral bully, so that his 20th century descendant, Dr. Ralph Greenway, has a legacy to atone for. Here, he is so effective as an urbane, white-collar psychiatrist targeted by the taunting Horatio that one can easily imagine he'd have made a credible straight contract player for Universal had comedy not panned out. Abbott plays his role commendably straight, only straying into eye-popping, broad comic reactions when called upon to react to floating matches and decanters, etc., that Horatio invisibly uses to frustrate him. The 40s Danbury household contains sight gag potential galore for Melody and Horatio to explore the modern age marvels of electric light, telephones, and radios. The new owners, Sheldon Gage and his fiancée June Prescott, John Shelton and Lynn Baggett, also employ Gail Sondergaard's Emily, who seems at first the archetypal frosty housekeeper she had portrayed in horror films so many times before, as in The Cat and the Canary in 1939 and The Black Cat 2 years later. Here, though, rather than simply being a harbinger of doom, she is a psychic in sympathy with the restless phantoms, determined to enlist the house in helping them seek eternal rest. She even gets a possible sly in-joke as she exits a scene. "All you gotta do is whistle," referencing Lauren Bacall's bewitching come-on to Humphrey Bogart in 1944's To Have and Have Not. More blatant wisecracking is supplied by June's Aunt Millie, played by Binnie Barnes, an actress who lived to be 95 and prided herself on never accepting subservient parts. Eventually, a séance is held, whereby the unseen Melody and Horatio communicate enough via prompted table knocks to set the household on the hunt for the all-important exonerating letter, aided by Emily becoming a conduit for the spirit of Tom Danbury to voice a cryptic rhyme of clues. Greenway's theft of a Queen Anne clock from a museum causes a climactic broad comedy car chase, one concession made to Bud and Lou's regular slapstick territory between Horatio and a beleaguered police sergeant, William Hall. Finally, the document is found and enables the movie to end in an upbeat glimpse of the afterlife, even more rosily depicted later that year in A Matter of Life and Death, as Melody is restored in a stream of astral glitter to Tom, but Horatio is temporarily blocked from Nora at the pearly gates by its closure for Washington's birthday. The time of their lives overcomes the challenge of its star's divisiveness extremely well, to give fans an insight into how strong both Abbott and Costello could be even when functioning as solo talents. Fortunately, their normal service as a duo was resumed with their next film, the post-war sequel Buck Privates Come Home, just 2 years before they and their parent studio Universal enjoyed a new wave of popularity by pairing them with Universal's dust-gathering Monster Hall of Fame, as we shall see. Stay tuned. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe.